In this lecture, I'm going to talk about operational definitions. To begin with, an operational definition is the way in which we convert a theory or an idea into reality. So in the social sciences, we deal with what are called as constructs. Constructs are concepts that are developed by scientists. Take a construct like self-esteem. Self-esteem is a construct that is developed by scientists, and by itself, it can only be defined in terms of its measurement. So when we convert self-esteem, the construct, or when we talk about self-esteem, the construct, in the social sciences, and when we talk about it in terms of how we would measure it, what we're really doing is going through a process of operationalizing self-esteem. So one way in which we could measure self-esteem is by asking people a question in a survey: how good do you feel about yourself? So you could answer a self-report question which says, I feel good about myself on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being strongly disagree, 2 being disagree, 3 being neutral, 4 being agree, and 5 being strongly agree. This process of defining self-esteem in terms of how you would measure it is called its operational definition. Now, the construct self-esteem could of course be measured in many different ways. You can measure self-esteem by using a survey question. You can also measure self-esteem by observing how people behave in a stressful situation. So you could probably go to a classroom using a video camera, observe to see how people are interacting or how people are reacting to each other. And you could use that as an operational measure of self-esteem. You can also use a completely different measure. For instance, you can look at people's social media pages and look to see how they're presenting information or how they're writing about events that are happening, and look to see if it reflects people's self-esteem. Now, the point is that each of these measures, or each of these operational definitions of self-esteem, are all definitions that are indicators of self-esteem, and they're all fallible indicators in the sense that some would measure self-esteem or a certain dimension of self-esteem, whereas others would not. So for instance, the Facebook measure, the social media measure, and the classroom measure might measure your self-esteem in terms of your interactive self-esteem, how you are with the public. Your self-report measure might measure self-esteem on your self-report or a self-perceived basis. That is, what do you think about your self-esteem as against how do you present yourself because of your self-esteem. The bigger point here is that each indicator, and you can have many of them, becomes a fallible indicator of the construct self-esteem, right? And we can think of many examples of things, of this. Think of another construct, intelligence, right? Intelligence is a construct, right? There's really no such thing as intelligence unless we can talk about it in some measurement terms. So whenever we say somebody's intelligent, we talk about something that they measurably do. Usually it could be a score on your SATs or a score on some kind of a standardized intelligence test. Now, if you think about the SATs are one operational definition, one way of measuring intelligence. But it's not the only way of doing it, because what the SATs don't measure is your ability to, say, for instance, speak well or draw well or write well to the same extent. And therefore, you may have another operational definition of intelligence based on people's artistic performance, for instance. And then you may have another operational definition based on someone's ability to talk or to speak or to present in front of a public. Notice that each of these reflects some measure of the larger construct intelligence. And so each indicator is a fallible reflection of the same construct. And so one construct can have many different indicators based on how you operationally define it. So if we are interested in intelligence from a classroom or a scholastic standpoint, we are interested in operationalizing intelligence based using the SATs. If, on the other hand, what you're really interested in is intelligence from an artistic standpoint or from a dramatic presentation or dramatic ability standpoint, we would use a different operationalization. All right. The other concept that's related to this is the concept of construct dimensions. So constructs, so we know what a construct is. A construct is a scientific concept. A construct can have many different dimensions depending on the construct, and that will influence the way you would operationalize it. Take a simple example as height or weight or even something like thirst. Most of these are considered one-dimensional constructs, and what that means is you can measure this from using basically one simple linear scale from low to high, right? So you can take a number line, and you can take that number line with a starting point and an ending point, and you can say, all right, how thirsty are you, or how tall is somebody, or what's the distance between one place and another. These are one-dimensional constructs, and if you notice, they are measured, operationalized on one-dimensional terms because the underlying construct is very easily represented with one dimension. It does not require multiple dimensions. Some constructs, however, are two-dimensional. Take a common example that we use in the social sciences, socioeconomic status. Socioeconomic status reflects lifestyle. So this is a very common construct that we use. When we try to predict a person's lifestyle, we generally measure it or operationalize it in terms of their socioeconomic status. Socioeconomic status is operationalized further using two dimensions: a person's income and a person's education. And if you look at the quadrants there, on the upper right is high income, high education, and the upper left is high income, low education. And you can understand why a person who is highly educated with a lot of money is very different than a person who is very low education but has the same amount of money. So their lifestyles are completely different. Likewise, if you look at the bottom left, and your bottom right, which is low education, high income, low education, or high education, low income, you understand why a person who is highly educated with little money is different from a person who has little education and little money. So you understand why some constructs require two dimensions for accurate measurement and therefore are operationalized accordingly. A very common two-dimensional construct that we utilize in our everyday life is in our GPS systems. So if you think about how global positioning works, if you need to go from point A to point B on a map, and this has been going on for the last a few hundred years now, we always use 2 points. We use latitude and longitude. So you need to know the latitude and the longitude in order to pinpoint the position. But these same two dimensions are not enough if what you're going to be doing is flying a plane. So if you're flying a plane, suddenly you require a third dimension, and that is altitude. Because it's not enough to know where a place is on the map, you need to know how high it is from sea level in order to fly to it. So now you have certain constructs that are three-dimensional. Now you can take the same analogy and extend it to understand why some concepts are four-dimensional. So think about it. If you were trying to fly a spacecraft up into the sky, it's not enough just knowing latitude, longitude, and altitude. You also need to know the fourth dimension, which is Einstein's dimension that comes from the theory of relativity, which is time. So now you have four dimensions that are necessary in order to position or define certain constructs. Likewise, you can extend this further and understand why you may have five-dimensional, six-dimensional, and n-dimensional constructs. Now, as an introductory course, what we're going to be focused on is one-dimensional constructs. So for now, all we're going to talk about in this course are one-dimensional constructs, but it's important for you to understand that constructs could have more than one dimensions, which influence how they're operationalized.